This is Christianarchy Today, where we unabashedly proclaim that if you think you understand Christianity, you probably are wrong in one area or another. Over the last month, we've talked about misinformation and how it's come through the ages about Christianity. We've labeled some music Christian music. Some people would say that's not. I would say it is. I want to worship God when I hear music like that. I really do. So, I mean, it's just so interesting. We talked about how some people like to call the United States a Christian nation, as though, you know, the people in China aren't part of a Christian nation. God is over that, those people. God loves those people. Christ died for those people. So there's, you know, we talked about how there was this idea of sola scriptura last week and sola spiritus, and which is the concept that all believers are led of the Spirit and that God has written His laws upon our minds and upon our hearts, and that arguments over chapter and verse are missing the point. That is something that, now I say you probably don't understand Christianity. People would hear this and say, no, you don't understand Christianity, Mr. McCraney. I mean, that is just not true. God does not, we have His word written on ink and on paper, and that's true, we do. It is a witness for us, but He also writes it on our hearts so that people who have the law written on their hearts by God who live in Africa, we were just talking, Patrick was just talking about those guys in Africa, and they have it written on their heart. They're as good as gold as someone who has the book in front of them, you see? But we've kind of made this Bible bigger, more important than it is. This is not to say it's not important, so don't misconstrue the message. This led us last week to end the show with the following, that the faith today is totally and completely subjective. And how could this be, especially in a world where every pastor and every reverend and every priest and every bishop is claiming otherwise by saying that the faith must be objectively lived and understood, that this is the truth. Theology and doctrine matters. It is knowing this perfectly that gets you right with God, and subjectively opens it up to saying people get to kind of think about things the way they want. Now, let me make a clarification here. Subjective Christianity does not mean that there's not an objective truth. God is the author of objective truth, and there is one, certainly. I'm not talking about relativism here. I'm just talking about God's truth, and our perception of that, they differ. It depends on our maturity, our intelligence, our emotions, the diet we're on. I don't know why I said that, but it includes these things, and so they play into how we see the world around us. And I think God understood that. To be quite frank, I think God left a lot of things up for debate so that those who really love Him would choose to love others in spite of those debates, and those who love the law and to be mean will use those in that way. So this brings us to a very, very important point that needs to be understood. And I would just want to go through, and I'm going to use this side over here to represent objective faith. And then I'm going to use this side over here to correspond to subjective faith, okay? So objective faith says the Bible was written to us in our day. And what people who are pushing for an objective faith say is this Bible in our hands was written by Paul for us to have today, that it was all meant for us to be the audience. Subjective faith says the Bible is a history of what has happened, what is done. And you know, when you call it a subjective faith, this is my understanding of it. The objective Christian faith says it has application to Christ's church and bride. What it says is we are the bride of Christ. We are waiting for Christ to come and take us. We have been waiting for 2,000 years, and we're going to continue to wait. And so because of that, we are under obligation to live the certain New Testament life that was described in the New Testament. The objective faith says the Bible is teaching us spiritual principles for the past 2,000 years that we read, we understand by the Spirit in us, and we say, I need to forgive. Oh, I need to have patience. oh, I need to try to do this and that and that. And the spiritual principles are what the Bible is giving us, not mandates on how to have an objective faith. The other thing is, the objective faith seems to say in one way or another, this world is going to end. Jesus is coming back to get us one way or another. I'm not just talking about futurism, but one way or another, that's kind of the view of those who hold to the objective view. They say, we are the church, we are the bride, we have to stick together the way the New Testament commands because Christ is going to come back and get us one way or another, either in the idealist, the historicist, or the futurist view. The subjective view says Jesus has come and taken his church. Now we all, with God living in us and writing his laws upon our hearts, we all by the Spirit grow and mature and understand him and his objective truths in different ways and love each other along the way. The objective faith says that Christianity is objectively practiced. And that means this is how Christianity must be done. You must do communion. You must fast. You must pray. You must, all the musts that go along with religion. And the subjective view says, I am a spiritual creature, a member of the spiritual New Jerusalem. I'm a member of that community by the Spirit in me, and the Lord tells me how to do things. That maybe I will fast and maybe I won't. Maybe I'll pray officially and maybe I'll just talk to God. And it removes us from the objective demands that churches often put on us. The objective faith says this was set up by Jesus and his apostles, and it continues to exist and should exist the way they set it up. And there have been thousands of movements to try to continue that forward. And the subjective faith says, listen, that Bible is complete, it's done, that we live in an age when God is doing everything through the whole world spiritually. And Jesus and that age of everything read in the Bible is complete. And so that allows things now to be open and subjectively lived. So according to the objective approach, the New Testament structure and government, and you'll find this in churches all over the world, there are elders boards because the Bible talks about elders. There are deacon boards because the Bible talks about deacons. There are apostles, there are spiritual gifts, there are miracles, there's church discipline. Somebody is found sleeping with their girlfriend. There is a church board that handles church discipline. Why? Because the church needs to be ready for what? For Jesus to come back and get it. And therefore, all these things that we read about in the New Testament are in place so that we continue to practice it until that happens. But so the material church has to continue in the objective view. From the subjective view, there's no more plain church. If you want to go to a church on a Sunday or a Tuesday, if you don't want to go, you don't. If you do, you can. You can go to a different church every week, or you can go to no church for 20 years. It's no longer about the church and going to church. The subjective faith of the Spirit is God lives in you. You are part of the spiritual kingdom, and you are brother and sister with people all over the world. And you can relate to him in the forest. You can relate to him by going to a church to hear some teachings. You can be very active in a church and go every week and enjoy it. Whatever you want is what that is. See, but in the objective side, they try to say, no, you must do. You must. Why? Because of those things I just explained. The New Testament talks about a time, God says in Hebrews chapter 14, there's going to come a time where I'm going to shake everything, and anything that can be shaken will be shaken to dust in heaven and on earth. It's very symbolic language. And so the only thing that will remain are things that cannot be shaken. That's part of the subjective church. We live in an unshakable kingdom, you see. That New Jerusalem, the old Jerusalem, can be shaken by an earthquake today and destroyed. But the New Jerusalem can never be shaken. The spiritual church can never be shaken. The spiritual believers can never be moved in their heart from him because he's in them, you see. See the difference? But if we were still in a shakeable kingdom, And like many people suggest, churches can be shaken, denominations can be shaken up. They can allow homosexuals to do this, or they can do this or that, and all these debates, and that's the objective church, and it's dead. It's over. And that's what I'm just trying to get through to you. God has had the complete victory, through his Son. As 1 Corinthians 15 says, 22, I think it is in 23, he's had that victory. And God is an all in all. And so people come to know his Son by the Spirit. And they come to know him by our sharing the good news with them. And by the love that we extend. And all the other stuff has been broken down to nothingness anymore, because now his kingdom reigns. All wait on the end of this whole thing to occur in the objective world. And that's why if he hasn't come, then the objective way is the way. You have to understand that. If he has not come, then the objective way is the way we should be following. If that's true, there are so many things that we are failing in that I can't believe we even can con ourselves into believing that we're part of it. But if he did come as he promised he would, and as the apostles promised that he would, throughout the New Testament, if he did come, then the subjective way is the right way, and all this stuff is gone. So next week we're going to talk about, did he come or not? What does the Bible say? Not what do I say, what does the Bible say? That's all you have to look at. And if Jesus said he was coming back, and if the apostles all said he was coming back in a short period of time, and if the books they wrote said he was all coming back, and he didn't come back, then they were all wrong. And do you want to know something interesting? Something you may not have known about Christianity, is that the scholars say, yeah, they were wrong. They really believed he was coming back, the apostles, but they just made mistakes. They just had that hope he was coming back when they wrote what they wrote, but they were making mistakes. And in my opinion, if they made mistakes about when he was coming back and they didn't know, then they were making mistakes all through those epistles. Let's take the book, throw it away, and forget it all. But they didn't make mistakes. And Jesus was not wrong. And the word is trustworthy. We can read what it says and trust what it says. So next week we're going to open up and say, in Christianity, you've probably all believed that he's coming back. You're waiting for the end of the world and the second coming and everything else. Well, next week we'll see if that's true. We're going to continue to build upon this model and standing by the claim that if you think you know Christianity, you probably don't. Out.